The great space station floated in the darkness like a crystal flower. It spun slowly around a neutron star that glowed with cold blue light. For 300 years, this station had been the center of galactic peace. Inside its walls, 47 different alien races worked together without ever making a sound. Ambassador Velthara drifted through the main chamber like a ghost made of silver light. Her body was see-through and changed colors when she was happy or sad. Right now, she glowed soft blue because everything was going perfectly. As the speaker of silence, she made sure no one ever broke the most important rule of the galaxy: no talking. Ever. The chamber was huge and beautiful. Floating crystals hung in the air, glowing with different colors to show information. Strange plants from a dozen worlds grew in perfect rows, their leaves changing colors to send messages. The floor was made of some kind of smooth stone that felt warm under the feet of creatures who had feet. Around the room, beings from across the galaxy conducted their business in perfect quiet. The tall, thin ethereals, like Velthara, sent their thoughts directly into each other's minds. The rock-like crystalline assembly members changed their body colors to communicate. The snake people from the Scaled Confederation used special scents to share information. The gas cloud beings from the Whirlwind Nebula made shapes in the air to talk to each other. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was completely silent. Velthara remembered the old stories about the time before the sacred Protocol of Silence. Back then, the galaxy had been full of noise and chaos. Different species had made horrible sounds with their mouths and throats. They had screamed and shouted and argued. Wars had started because creatures misunderstood the meaning of these vocal noises. Those dark times were called the Era of Cacophony. Billions had died in wars that started over the meaning of a single spoken word. Species had destroyed entire worlds because they could not understand what their enemies were trying to say with their primitive mouth sounds. Then came the Great Silence. The wisest beings from every race came together and created the sacred Protocol. They discovered that thoughts were pure and clear. Mind-to-mind communication could not be misunderstood. When beings shared their thoughts directly, there was no room for confusion or anger. The protocol had 3 simple rules. First, no being could make vocal sounds during any official gathering. Second, all important communication had to happen through telepathy, color changes, scents, or movements. Third, any species that could not follow these rules would be banned from the galactic community forever. For 3 centuries, it had worked perfectly. No wars, no misunderstandings, no chaos. Just peaceful, quiet cooperation between all the intelligent species of the galaxy. Today was supposed to be another perfect day. The council had gathered to discuss trade agreements between the mineral worlds and the forest systems. The meeting was going smoothly. The mineral folk were showing their offers through crystal formations that grew from the floor. The tree shepherds were responding with patterns of light that danced across their bark-like skin. Everything was going according to protocol. Until the alarm chimed softly through the chamber. Velthara's form flickered with surprise. The alarm meant that unknown visitors were approaching the station. This almost never happened. The location of the Harmony Station was one of the most carefully guarded secrets in the galaxy. Only Council species knew where it was. A message appeared in her mind from the station's defense systems. 3 ships had emerged from hyperspace near the neutron star. They were small, primitive-looking vessels made of metal and ceramic. The ships were broadcasting identification signals, but they were in a completely unknown format. More concerning, the ships were also broadcasting something else: noise, actual acoustic vibrations traveling through space via radio waves. The primitive beings inside these ships were trying to communicate using the forbidden method of vocal sounds. Velthara sent an urgent telepathic message to High Arbiter Keth Prime. He was the oldest and most respected member of the Council. a being made of living crystal who had helped create the sacred protocol centuries ago. His response came back immediately, filled with curiosity and concern. The unknown species called themselves humans. They claimed to come from a small world in the outer rim of the galaxy. Somehow, they had discovered the location of Harmony Station. They were requesting permission to dock and present themselves as candidates for council membership. The request was shocking. New species rarely applied to join the council. When they did, they usually spent decades learning the sacred protocol before they were even allowed to approach the station. These humans seemed to have no understanding of proper communication methods at all. Keth Prime's crystalline form appeared at the center of the chamber. He was ancient and enormous, his faceted body catching and reflecting the light from the floating crystals. When he communicated, his thoughts were so powerful that every being in the room could feel them. The council would evaluate these humans, he decided. It would be a brief meeting. The primitive creatures would be shown the proper way of civilized communication. When they inevitably failed to adapt, they would be sent away with instructions to return in 50 years if they had learned to behave properly. Velthara was not so sure it would be that simple. The acoustic vibrations coming from the human ships were unlike anything she had ever experienced. They were not just random noise. There were patterns in the sounds, variations in pitch, and rhythm that seemed to carry meaning. It was primitive and chaotic, but there was something almost hypnotic about it. The docking bay prepared to receive the human ships. Special sound-dampening fields were activated to contain any acoustic contamination. Neural suppressors were readied to help the humans control their primitive vocal impulses. Medical teams stood by in case the shock of proper civilized behavior caused the humans physical distress. As the first human ship connected to the station, Velthara felt something she had not experienced in decades: nervousness. These creatures were about to bring something into their perfect, quiet world that had not existed here for 300 years. The sound of voices. The airlock cycled through its sequence. Atmospheric pressures equalized. The massive doors began to open with a soft hiss that seemed loud as thunder in the perpetually quiet station. 3 humans stepped through the doorway into the sacred chamber of galactic peace. They looked around at the magnificent space with obvious wonder. Their faces showed emotions that changed from moment to moment. They seemed to take in everything at once, their eyes moving constantly from one marvel to another. The assembled representatives of 47 species watched and waited. This was the moment of truth. Would these primitive beings understand the significance of where they stood? Would they recognize the sacred nature of the silence that surrounded them? The human in front, a middle-aged male with kind eyes and graying hair, looked directly at High Arbiter Keth Prime. Then he looked around the chamber at all the watching faces. His mouth opened. Velthara held her breath, her form flickering between colors of anticipation and dread. The human smiled. And then he spoke. "Hello!" The word exploded through the sacred chamber like a bomb made of sound. It crashed against the crystal walls and bounced back twice as loud. The floating crystals above began to shake and crack. Their soft glow turned angry red as they struggled to process what had just happened. Ambassador Kang Minho had no idea that his simple greeting would cause such chaos. He watched in shock as the most powerful beings in the galaxy reacted to his voice like he had just attacked them. The beautiful silver lady who had been floating near the center of the room suddenly blazed with bright orange light. Her see-through body became solid and sharp-edged. She looked like she was in terrible pain. Around the chamber, other creatures began to panic. A group of tall, thin beings like living trees started dropping their leaves. The leaves fell to the floor and turned black. Some of the rock-like creatures began to crack down their centers. Their colored lights flickered wildly before going dark. The snake people coiled into tight balls and hid their heads. The gas cloud. Beings started to break apart at their edges. losing pieces of themselves into the air. Even the floor stones seemed to dim their warm glow. Dr. Park Subin stepped forward quickly. She was a language expert who had studied alien communication for 20 years. She had never seen anything like this reaction to simple human speech. "We are very sorry," she said, trying to keep her voice soft and calm. "We did not mean to cause any harm." But her words only made things worse. Several more creatures collapsed. The beautiful crystal formations that hung from the ceiling began falling to the floor with loud crashes. The peaceful chamber was turning into a disaster zone. Captain Lee. Dae-hyun moved protectively in front of his teammates. His military training told him they were in serious danger. The aliens around them were not just upset. They seemed to be experiencing real physical pain from the sound of human voices. Suddenly, thoughts crashed into their minds like ice-cold water. It was the Silver Lady, and she was furious. Her telepathic voice felt sharp and cutting inside. "Their heads! Stop your noise-making immediately," she projected with tremendous force. "You are destroying our sacred harmony. You are criminals and barbarians. You have violated the most important law in the galaxy." The three humans grabbed their heads as the telepathic message hit them. It was like having someone scream directly inside their brains. But Captain Lee had experienced mental attacks during his military service. He fought back against the overwhelming thoughts and managed to speak. "We mean no harm to anyone," he said firmly. "We came here in peace. We only want to understand." His voice sent fresh waves of panic through the assembled aliens. More crystals fell from the ceiling. The warm floor stones became cold and gray. Some of the smaller creatures had stopped moving entirely. Then the most terrifying presence in the chamber made itself known. High Arbiter Keth Prime was ancient beyond human understanding. His crystalline body was as large as a building and had survived since the galaxy was young. When he communicated, it felt like standing in an earthquake, made of thoughts. "Remove these creatures from our station," his telepathic voice commanded with the power of centuries. "They cannot be taught. They cannot be civilized. They will destroy everything we have built. Send them away forever." The message was so powerful that all three humans fell to their knees. Ambassador Kang Minho felt blood running from his nose. Dr. Park Subin was clutching her head and trying not to scream. Captain Lee was fighting to stay conscious. But something unexpected was happening in the chamber. Not all of the aliens were panicking. Some of the younger ones were watching the humans with curiosity instead of fear. They had never heard vocal communication before. They found the sounds strange but fascinating. A young ethereal named Lysandra was hiding behind her elders, but her silver form was glowing with interest rather than anger. She had noticed something the older beings had missed. The human voices carried emotions that telepathic communication could never express. When the human called Kang Minho had said, "Hello," she had felt warmth and friendship in the sound. When Dr. Park Subin had apologized, there was genuine sadness and concern in her voice. These were not the chaotic noisemakers from the old stories. These were intelligent beings trying to communicate in the only way they knew how. Lysandra was not the only young being who noticed this. A junior member of the Scaled Confederation named Hostel had stopped hiding and was listening carefully to the human voices. A young crystalline called Pethrim was changing colors in patterns that showed curiosity rather than fear. Ambassador Kang Minho slowly got back to his feet. His nose was still bleeding from the telepathic attack, but his eyes were determined. He had spent 40 years as a diplomat, dealing with difficult situations across human space. He recognized opportunity when he saw it. "Honored council members," he said, keeping his voice as gentle as possible. "We understand that our way of communication is strange to you. But we ask for one chance to show you that it is not evil or chaotic. Give us one day to prove that the voice can be a tool for peace, not just war." His request sent the chamber into silent debate. The humans could see telepathic messages flashing between the alien beings like lightning. Colors changed rapidly on the crystal creatures. The gas beings swirled in complex patterns. The tree-like ethereals dropped more leaves that formed written symbols on the floor. Most of the council wanted the humans gone immediately. But the younger members argued for giving them a chance. It was scientific curiosity, they claimed. They wanted to study these vocal creatures to better understand why sound communication was so dangerous. High Arbiter Keth Prime was silent for a long time. His ancient crystal form seemed to be struggling with some internal conflict. Finally, his thoughts reached out to the entire chamber. "One day," he decided, "you will be given 1 day in an isolated chamber to demonstrate your communication method. If you can prove it has value for peaceful purposes, we will consider your application. If not, humanity will be forever banned from the galactic community." The decision was final. Security beings came forward to escort the humans to their isolation chamber. As they walked through the damaged council room, Ambassador Kang Minho noticed something important. Some of the younger aliens were following their progress with fascination rather than fear. Dr. Park Subin whispered to her companions as they were led away. "Did you see how some of them reacted? They are curious about our voices. That is our chance." Captain Lee nodded grimly. "1 day to save our entire species' future, no pressure at all." As the heavy doors of their isolation chamber sealed shut, the 3 humans found themselves alone with an impossible task. How do you prove the value of speech to beings who have spent 300 years believing it represents chaos and destruction? Outside their chamber, the council worked to repair the damage caused by their voices, but the real damage could not be fixed so easily. For the first time in centuries, the younger generation was questioning the sacred protocol. The seeds of change had been planted with a single word: hello. The isolation chamber was small and cold. Energy barriers hummed around the walls, designed to keep human voices from escaping and causing more damage to the station. Through the clear wall, the 3 humans could see council members watching, them like dangerous animals in a zoo. Dr. Park Subin paced back and forth across the small room. Her mind was working fast, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "How do we show them what they have lost?" she asked her companions. "They think silence equals peace, but what if they are wrong?" Captain Lee Dae-hyun sat on the floor with his legs crossed. Years of military meditation had taught him to stay calm under pressure. In battle, when technology fails and telepathy gets jammed, soldiers need something reliable. The human voice never needs power or special equipment. It just works. Ambassador Kang Minho studied the aliens, watching them through the barrier. Some looked angry and afraid. Others seemed curious, especially the younger ones. "We need to reach the ones who are still willing to learn," he said quietly. They decided to start simple. Dr. Park Subin began with basic emotional communication. She spoke the same phrase over and over, but changed her tone each time. "I understand," she said with sympathy. "I understand," she repeated with anger. "I understand," she whispered with doubt. "I understand," she laughed with joy. Even through the energy barriers, some council members began to notice the differences. The words were the same, but the meaning changed completely based on how they were spoken. Their telepathic system could never show such subtle variations in feeling. Captain Lee demonstrated crisis communication. He created pretend emergency, situations where split-second vocal commands could save lives. "Fire in the engine room!" he shouted, then explained how quick voice warnings could prevent disasters. "Incoming asteroid, hard left!" He called out, showing how pilots could coordinate in battle when telepathy was blocked. His military bearing made the examples feel real. Several council members began to understand that human voices could be tools for survival, not just chaos. But It was Ambassador Kang Minho who created the breakthrough moment. Without warning, he began to sing. The melody was ancient and beautiful, a Korean lullaby his grandmother had sung to him when he was small. His voice was rough from years of diplomatic work, but it carried something no telepathic message could ever contain. It carried the weight of human history. The song spoke of missing distant homes, of love that traveled across space and time, of hope that survived the darkest nights. Every note held the experience of generations, mothers comforting crying children, communities celebrating together, lovers sharing quiet moments, friends offering support through simple acoustic connection. Through their observation systems, the council members experienced something they had not felt in 300 years, raw, unfiltered emotion that came straight from the heart. Several aliens began to cry, those who still had the ability. Others found their rigid bodies relaxing, their defensive positions melting away. Young Lysandra pressed her silver form against the barrier. Her ethereal body was shimmering with excitement. She had never felt before. She was beginning to understand that human chaos was actually a complex system of emotional communication that their sterile protocols could never achieve. But the most surprising reaction came from High Arbiter Keth Prime himself. The ancient, crystalline being began to vibrate, literally resonating with Kang Minho's song. Deep inside his crystal body, dormant frequencies awakened. Memories stirred of his own species from before the Great Silence. The crystalline assembly had once been singers. Their voices could harmonize with the very frequencies of space itself. They had created music that could reshape matter and energy. But they had given it all up for the promise of perfect peace. As Kang Minho's song continued, Keth Prime remembered what it felt like to sing. He remembered the joy of creating harmonies with his people. He remembered the deep satisfaction of expressing emotions through sound rather than hiding them behind telepathic walls. Other council members were having their own awakenings. The tree-like ethereals remembered wind songs that had once connected their forests across continents. The scaled confederation recalled hissing harmonies that had united their people in ancient times. Even the gas beings from the Whirlwind Nebula began to remember atmospheric symphonies they had created before joining the council. When the song finally ended, the chamber fell into a different kind of silence. It was not the enforced quiet of the sacred protocol. It was the profound stillness that follows genuine emotional connection. Ambassador Kang Minho looked directly at High Arbiter Keth Prime through the barrier. "Music is mathematics made beautiful," he said softly. "Emotion is information in its purest form. You have not achieved peace by eliminating sound. You have only eliminated half of what makes communication complete." Dr. Park Subin added her voice to his. "Every advanced civilization needs backup systems. Your telepathic network is wonderful, but what happens when it fails? What happens? In emergencies, when minds are too panicked to think clearly, the voice works when nothing else can." Captain Lee stood at attention as he addressed the council. "In my military service, I have seen telepathic communications jammed by enemy technology. I have seen mental networks collapse under stress. But a human voice can cut through any interference. It can rally troops, coordinate rescues, and maintain hope when all seems lost." The three humans stood together, their voices joining in harmony. They spoke about cooperation, about understanding, about the beauty that comes when different forms of communication work together instead of competing. Through the barriers, they could see changes happening among the council members. The younger ones were glowing with excitement. Some of the older beings were beginning to soften their rigid positions. Even ancient Keth Prime was vibrating with frequencies that had been silent for centuries. But the most important change was happening inside the old crystal being himself. For the first time in 300 years, High Arbiter Keth Prime was remembering what his people had sacrificed for peace. They had gained harmony, yes, but they had lost their souls. As the human demonstration continued, something unprecedented began to happen throughout the station. The youngest council members started trying to make sounds of their own, soft, tentative noises that had not been heard in the galaxy for centuries. The revolution had begun, and it started with a simple lullaby sung by a human grandfather missing his home. Outside the isolation chamber, the galaxy was about to change forever. The effects of the human demonstration spread through the station like ripples in a pond. In the hours after Kang Minho's song, something that had not happened in 3 centuries began to occur. The young council members started to rebel. Lysandra was the first to break the sacred protocol. In a private meeting with her ethereal collective elders, she did something unthinkable. She tried to make a sound with her own body. The noise was rough and untrained, like a baby's first cry. Her elders recoiled in horror, their silver forms blazing with shock and anger. But Lysandra felt something she had never experienced before. She felt the physical sensation of emotion given sound. It was raw and powerful and completely her own. The rebellion spread quickly among the younger generation. Hostel from the Scaled Confederation tried to copy the emotional variations Dr. Park Subin had shown them. His hissing sounds were clumsy at first, but they carried meanings his scent language could never express. Pethrim of the Crystalline Assembly discovered that vibrating different parts of his rock-like body could create musical tones. The harmonics were beautiful and complex, unlike anything the galaxy had heard for centuries. Even some of the gas beings from the Whirlwind Nebula began experimenting. They found they could create sound waves by controlling their atmospheric density, making music from the very air around them. The older council members watched in growing horror as their carefully maintained order crumbled. Emergency telepathic meetings were called constantly. The mental messages flew between the elders like angry lightning, demanding immediate action to stop the contamination of their youth. High Arbiter Keth Prime called for the immediate removal of the humans and severe punishment for any council member who had been infected by their acoustic influence. But when he tried to enforce his will, something unprecedented happened. He was challenged vocally. "No," said Lysandra, her inexperienced voice cracking with determination. "I will not go back to silence." The word hit the ancient crystalline being like a physical blow. For the first time in millennia, Keth Prime remembered what it felt like to hear disagreement rather than simply receive opposing thoughts. The rawness of it, the immediacy, the impossible-to-ignore nature of acoustic communication struck him with terrible clarity. More young voices joined Lysandra's protest. Hostel hissed his disagreement with the elders' demands. Pethrim's crystal body rang like a bell as he voiced his support for the humans. The gas being called Nebula created swirling sound patterns that clearly meant freedom. The council chamber erupted into chaos. For the first time in 3 centuries, beings were arguing out loud. Ancient species who had maintained perfect, telepathic harmony now found themselves in vocal disagreements. The carefully controlled mental frequencies that managed galactic trade, territorial agreements, and diplomatic relations began breaking down. In their isolation chamber, the humans watched the destruction unfold through their observation screens. Captain Lee recognized the signs of institutional collapse from his military training. "We have started something we cannot control," he said quietly. Dr. Park Subin was documenting everything with scientific fascination. They are not just learning to speak, she realized. They are rediscovering parts of themselves they had forgotten existed. Ambassador Kang Minho felt the heavy weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We came here seeking membership in their community," he said sadly. "Instead, we may have destroyed the foundation of their civilization." The situation grew worse by the hour. Ancient species who had not disagreed in centuries were now shouting at each other. Some embraced the change with wild enthusiasm, discovering emotional depths they had forgotten. Others clung desperately to the old ways, viewing the vocal rebellion as a return to the dark ages of chaos and war. The stellar communications network began showing signs of stress. This vast system connected every star system in the galaxy, allowing instant communication across impossible distances. It worked by using the collective telepathic power of the council members, their minds linked together in perfect harmony. But as more council members abandoned telepathy to experiment, with voices, the delicate mental matrix began to fracture. Communication nodes went offline. Trade routes lost contact with each other. Emergency systems started failing across multiple star systems. The galaxy that had achieved perfect peace was fragmenting into chaos, and the humans in their small chamber realized they were responsible for all of it. The most dramatic change was happening in High Arbiter Keth Prime himself. The ancient being had begun to remember not just intellectually, but physically, what his people had been like before the Great Silence. Deep in his crystalline matrix, genetic memories were awakening. The crystalline assembly had once been master musicians. Their voices could harmonize with the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. They could sing new matter into existence, create energy from pure sound, and even manipulate the flow of time through perfectly tuned acoustic resonance. But they had given it all up. In the name of peace, they had silenced the most beautiful voices in the galaxy. They had traded their souls for quiet. The realization filled Keth Prime with grief so deep it began cracking his crystalline exterior. Thin lines of light appeared across his ancient body as centuries of suppressed emotion found physical expression. As the cracks spread across his form, something else began to emerge. Deep inside his crystal core, dormant acoustic chambers were awakening. His people had evolved these organs over millions of years, then abandoned them for 3 centuries of silence. Now they were coming back to life. The station shook as Keth Prime's body began to resonate with frequencies that had been silent since the Great Silence. Other crystalline assembly members felt the vibrations and remembered their own suppressed abilities. One by one, they began to add their voices to their elders' awakening song. The sound was unlike anything the galaxy had heard. In living memory, it was pure crystal harmony, mathematical precision given emotional weight, the music of the spheres made audible. But it was also dangerous. The resonance was so powerful, it threatened to tear the station apart. Emergency systems activated as the structure began to shake itself to pieces. Through their observation screens, the humans watched in awe and terror as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy rediscovered its voice and nearly destroyed itself in the process. Captain Lee was the first to understand what was happening. "They need help," he said, moving toward the chamber's sealed door. "They are like children learning to walk, but they are falling off a cliff." Dr. Park Subin was already analyzing the acoustic patterns. "If they keep this up, the harmonic resonance will destroy the station. We have to get out there and teach them control." Ambassador Kang Minho made the decision that would define humanity's future in the galaxy. He began working on the chamber's locking mechanism. "We started this revolution," he said firmly. "Now we have to help them survive it." As alarms blared throughout the station and the very structure of galactic civilization trembled on the edge of collapse, 3 humans prepared to break out of their prison and save the galaxy they had accidentally thrown into chaos. The question was whether they would be in time to prevent the destruction of everything the Council had built over 3 centuries of careful silence. The crisis reached its breaking point when the stellar communications network began collapsing. This massive system was the backbone of galactic civilization, connecting thousands of star systems through carefully tuned telepathic frequencies. As more council members abandoned their mental discipline to experiment with voices, the delicate psychic web started falling apart piece by piece. Trade routes went silent. Emergency communications cut out. Entire star systems found themselves alone for the first time in centuries. The galaxy that had achieved perfect harmony was breaking into isolated fragments, and every failure made the situation worse. "We have to fix this," Captain Lee Dae-hyun said, his military training making him want to act even though protocol demanded they stay in their chamber. "If that network fails completely, billions of beings will be stranded." Dr. Park Subin was studying the cascade of failures on their monitoring screens. The problem is not the vocalization itself, she realized. It is the conflict between two different communication systems. They need a bridge, not a choice between voice and silence. Ambassador Kang Min-ho looked at the chaos they had caused and made the most important decision of his diplomatic career. "We are going to help them, whether they want our help or not." Breaking out of their isolation chamber required all their skills. Captain Lee used his demolition training to overload the energy barriers. Dr. Park applied her knowledge of alien technology to disable the locking systems. Ambassador Kang used his diplomatic access codes, which somehow still worked despite their prisoner status. Alarms screamed throughout the station as the humans escaped their containment. Emergency lights flashed red warnings in the corridors. Automated security systems activated, but the chaos in the council chamber had confused even the computer networks. The main chamber was a disaster. 47 species were arguing in a mixture of telepathic projections and experimental vocalizations that created a storm of conflicting communication. Ancient enemies were hurling both mental insults and primitive sound accusations at each other. Centuries of suppressed disagreements erupted in chaotic combinations of thought speech and vocal noise. High Arbiter Keth Prime stood at the center of the chaos, his crystalline form flickering with distress. Cracks covered his ancient body as he tried desperately to restore order through traditional telepathic commands. But his authority had crumbled along with the sacred protocol. The harmonic resonance from the awakening crystalline assembly was tearing the station apart. Their rediscovered voices were beautiful but completely uncontrolled. Metal supports bent under the acoustic pressure. Crystal formations shattered. The artificial atmosphere itself began to vibrate in dangerous patterns. Ambassador Kang Min-ho walked directly into the center of the chaos. He ignored the mental projections of anger and fear that hit him from all directions. The noise was overwhelming, but he had experienced worse during diplomatic crises in human space. He raised his voice, not in a shout, but in the same gentle tone he had used for his grandmother's lullaby. "Listen," he said simply. The single word cut through the chaos, not because it was loud, but because it carried something the council had forgotten: the power of genuine attention. One by one, the arguing voices began to quiet. Mental projections faded, even the dangerous crystalline. Harmonics reduced their intensity. "You believe you must choose between voice and silence," Kang Min-ho continued, his words reaching every being in the chamber. "But what if that choice is the real problem?" Dr. Park Subin joined him, her scientific background giving weight to her words. "Every advanced system needs backup methods. Your telepathic network is amazing, but it is fragile because it has only one way of working. Voice is not your enemy. It is your safeguard." Captain Lee addressed the military and security concerns directly. In battle, in crisis, when your mental networks fail or get blocked, you need something that works independently. The human voice does not depend on technology or group mental focus. It simply exists and functions. But it was young Lysandra who provided the key insight that would change everything. Her inexperienced voice rang clear across the chamber as she said, "What if we do not replace silence with sound, but learn to use both together?" The concept was revolutionary. For 3 centuries, the council had viewed communication as an either-or choice. Either the chaos of vocalization or the perfection of telepathic silence. The idea that they could maintain their mental harmony while also developing vocal abilities had never been considered. Keth Prime, his ancient form still resonating with half-remembered frequencies, slowly approached the humans. When he spoke, It was with a voice that had not been used for 1,000 years. The sound was rough and uncertain, but undeniably powerful. "Show us how," he said. What followed was the most important lesson in galactic history: the birth of hybrid communication. The humans worked with willing council members to develop a system that used telepathic precision for complex information while employing vocal communication for emotional expression, emergency protocols, and creative connection. They discovered something amazing. The two systems did not interfere with each other. Instead, they made each other stronger. Telepathic communication gained emotional depth when supported by vocal tone. Acoustic communication achieved greater precision when backed up by mental imagery. Dr. Park Subin worked with the technical teams to modify the stellar communications network. Instead of relying only on telepathic frequencies, the new system would use hybrid signals. Mental data streams would carry the complex information, while vocal confirmations would provide backup channels that could work independently if the psychic connections failed. Captain Lee trained emergency response teams in vocal coordination. He showed them how spoken commands could function even when telepathic networks were jammed or overloaded. His methods were simple but effective, designed to work under the worst possible conditions. Ambassador Kang Min-ho helped establish protocols for emotional communication. He taught the council members how to express feelings through tone and music while maintaining their telepathic clarity for practical matters. The breakthrough came when they successfully tested the new hybrid network. The restored stellar communications network was stronger than ever, with multiple backup systems that could function independently or together as needed. But the most remarkable discovery happened when the council members began experimenting with group harmony. They found they could sing together while maintaining their telepathic connections. The combination created something entirely new: communication that was both precise and emotional, practical and beautiful, ancient and futuristic. As the galaxy's communication infrastructure stabilized, the council chamber filled with an entirely new kind of harmony, not the enforced silence of suppression, but the joyful balance of all forms of expression working together. Young Lysandra's voice joined with Keth Prime's ancient harmonics. Hostel's hissing rhythms blended with Pethrim's crystalline tones. The gas beings created atmospheric symphonies that supported the telepathic frequencies instead of competing with them. For the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy was experiencing true harmony, not the artificial quiet of fear, but the natural balance of diversity working in concert. Ambassador Kang Min-ho looked around the transformed chamber and realized they had not just saved the galactic community. They had helped it evolve into something better than it had ever been before. The revolution was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the humans arrived, the Galactic Harmony Council looked completely different. The sterile chamber of enforced silence had become a dynamic space where telepathic communications danced alongside acoustic harmonies. Ancient beings, who had forgotten how to sing, were rediscovering their voices while keeping their psychic connections strong. Ambassador Kang Min-ho stood before the transformed council, no longer as someone begging for membership, but as humanity's first official, representative to what was now called the Galactic Communication Consortium. The name change was more than just bureaucracy. It showed that true harmony came not from eliminating differences, but from celebrating them. Dr. Park Subin had become the galaxy's first professor of hybrid communication. She had established research stations throughout known space where species could explore the full range of expression. Her work had revealed that many civilizations possessed sleeping vocal abilities they had suppressed or forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered and combined with their existing communication methods. Captain Lee Dae-hyun now headed the Emergency Communication Protocol Division. His job was making sure every star system had backup acoustic networks that could work independently of telepathic or technological systems. His military precision had proven invaluable in creating strong, reliable communication systems that could survive any crisis. The transformation had not been easy for everyone. Some species struggled to adapt to the new hybrid system. Others refused change entirely, forming isolated communities that maintained the old sacred protocol. But most embraced the expanded possibilities, finding that their ability to connect and understand had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Young Lysandra, now an elder in training despite her youth, had become a bridge between the old and new systems. Her natural talent for both telepathic and vocal communication made her an ideal teacher for species learning to integrate multiple forms of expression. Her voice, once raw and untrained, now carried the wisdom of both ancient telepathic traditions and newfound acoustic discoveries. The most remarkable transformation had happened in High Arbiter Keth Prime himself. The ancient crystalline being had spent months relearning his species' forgotten vocal traditions. He discovered that his people had once been master harmonic engineers whose songs could literally reshape the fabric of space and time. His voice now served as the foundation for the Council's new hybrid communication system, providing stability while allowing for infinite variation. On this particular day, the Council faced their first major test of the new system. They were mediating a territorial dispute between two species whose hatred had lasted for thousands of years. Under the old protocol, such conflicts had been resolved through cold, telepathic arbitration that often left the underlying emotions unresolved and festering. The Flame Dancers and the Ice Builders had been enemies since before the sacred protocol began. Their conflict was based on fundamental differences in how they viewed the universe. The Flame Dancers believed in constant change and passionate expression. The Ice Builders valued permanence and careful control. The dispute began with traditional telepathic presentations of facts and territorial claims. Both sides shared detailed mental maps, historical records, and legal arguments through precise psychic communication. This part worked exactly as it had for centuries. But as tensions rose over the competing claims, the hybrid system allowed something that had never happened before. The disputants were able to express their anger, grief, and fear directly through vocal communication while maintaining telepathic clarity about the actual issues. The Flame Dancers sang their frustration in voices like crackling fire. Their songs told of generations forced to suppress their natural passionate expression. They vocalized their pain at being misunderstood and feared by other species who viewed their intensity as dangerous. The Ice Builders responded with deep, resonant harmonies that spoke of their need for stability and order. Their voices carried the weight of responsibility they felt for maintaining the structures that kept civilization functioning. They expressed their fear that too much change would lead to chaos and destruction. For the first time in their long conflict, each species truly heard the pain and fear underlying their enemies' actions. The Flame Dancers realized that the Ice Builders' caution came from genuine care for the galaxy's stability. The Ice Builders understood that the Flame Dancers' passion was not destructive, but creative, a force that could bring positive change when properly channeled. Ambassador Kang Minho watched with pride as council members who had once enforced rigid silence now guided the disputants through both telepathic understanding and vocal healing. The resolution that emerged was not just a diplomatic agreement, but genuine emotional reconciliation. The former enemies agreed to share the disputed territory, with the Ice Builders providing stable infrastructure while the Flame Dancers contributed creative energy for new developments. More importantly, they established ongoing communication protocols that would prevent future misunderstandings. As the session concluded with a harmony sung by all participants, including the former enemies, Kang Minho reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Humanity had sought membership in a galactic community and instead had helped create an entirely new form of civilization. The galaxy was no longer silent, but it had not descended into chaos. Instead, it had found its voice. Millions of voices, billions of voices, all different, all unique, all contributing to a symphony that spanned the stars. That evening, as council members prepared to return to their home worlds with news of the day's success, High Arbiter Keth Prime approached the human delegation. His ancient voice, now rich with harmonics his species had thought lost forever, carried deep gratitude. "You taught us something we had forgotten," he said, his crystalline form resonating with gentle music. "Peace is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of understanding. Silence is not harmony. It is simply the pause between notes in a greater song." Ambassador Kang Minho smiled, thinking of his grandmother's lullaby that had started this transformation. "Every voice matters," he replied, "even when it disrupts the quiet, especially when it disrupts the quiet. Sometimes the most important thing anyone can do is speak up." Dr. Park Subin added her thoughts. "We have learned that communication is not about choosing between different methods. It is about finding ways to make them work together. The galaxy is stronger now because it has more ways to connect." Captain Lee nodded his agreement. "In my military experience, redundancy saves lives. Now the galaxy has backup systems for everything. If one type of communication fails, others can take over. We are safer and more connected than ever before." As humanity officially joined the galactic community, not as conquerors or subjects, but as teachers of a fundamental truth, the stars themselves seemed to sing with new possibilities. The universe had found its voice, and it would never be silent again. The transformation continued to spread. New species were arriving at the consortium stations, eager to learn hybrid communication. Old enemies were finding ways to resolve ancient conflicts through enhanced understanding. The galaxy was becoming more diverse and more unified at the same time. In the end, they had all learned the same lesson that humans had always known. True peace does not come from eliminating differences, but from learning to make beautiful music with them. The galaxy had become a vast symphony where every voice, every thought, every form of expression had its place. The Galactic Communication Consortium continued its work, helping species across the universe discover new ways to connect and understand each other. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that 3 humans had brought to the stars. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is a single voice, willing to say hello in a room full of silence. The galaxy sang on, and every voice was welcome in its endless, evolving song. The new harmony had begun, and it would never end.